Hello viewers, welcome to Sleepy Mind channel. Tonight we'll be exploring psychology effects, illusion. Close your eyes and listen to a voice repeating a simple sound. Ba, ba, ba. Clean and clear. Now open your eyes and watch a video of that exact same person's mouth moving, but their lips are visibly pronouncing. Suddenly, the audio tracking inside your head shifts completely. You no longer hear ba or ga. Your brain forces you to hear a brand new sound, da, da, da. Your ears are picking up one physical sound wave, but your eyes force your brain to rewrite the auditory reality. Discovered by Harry McGurk and John MacDonald in 1976, the McGurk effect reveals that speech perception is not purely an auditory experience. It is a deeply multimodal illusion. Your brain treats your senses like a committee meeting where the eyes hold the veto power. Because human communication relies heavily on watching lip movements to decipher speech in noisy environments, your visual system overrides your ears when a conflict arises. The brain splits the difference between the visual GA and the auditory ba, fabricating a compromise sound, da, to resolve the sensory contradiction. It is a profound demonstration of our cognitive vulnerability. It reminds us that what we hear people say is deeply colored by how they look when they say it. We live in a world where communication is easily distorted, proving that our interpretation of truth is a fragile negotiation between what we see and what we hear. Look around the room right now. You see the solid walls, the glowing screen, the furniture, and your own hands. Feels raw, unedited, and absolutely real. But cognitive science has a terrifying secret for you. Your brain does not actually see the physical world. It lives locked inside a dark, silent bone fortress called your skull. The vivid, three-dimensional reality you are experiencing right this second is not a direct translation of the world. It is a highly sophisticated, controlled hallucination generated by a fleshy supercomputer. It is comforting to believe our eyes act like perfect video cameras, filming the world objectively. But your eyes only gather messy, incomplete data, photons bouncing off surfaces, completely inverted and flattened onto a two-dimensional retina. Your brain takes this chaotic, broken static and matches it against your past memories, expectations, and fears. It literally guesses what should be out there, painting a predictive model that you perceive as reality. When your brain's guesses align with the physical world, we call it perception. When those guesses miss the mark, we call it an illusion or a hallucination. This means you have never actually touched the real world. You have only ever touched your brain's interpretation of it. We are all lonely artists, painting our own private versions of reality inside the dark of our minds, trying our best to make sure our internal paintings match up enough to survive together. Imagine looking at a classic green cylinder casting a heavy shadow across a gray and white checkerboard. There is a dark gray square marked A outside the shadow, and a light gray square marked B directly inside the shadow. If I told you that square A and square B are the exact same shade of gray, your brain would violently reject it. Even if I used a digital color picker to prove their hexadecimal values are identical, your eyes would continue to lie to you. Your mind refuses to see the objective data because it cares more about context than truth. This is Edward Adelson's famous checker shadow illusion, created at MIT. It reveals a beautiful, protective flaw in human biology. Your visual system did not evolve to measure the absolute amount of photons bouncing off a surface like a rigid light meter. Instead, it evolved to help you recognize objects in changing environments. Your brain knows that shadows make surfaces look darker. Therefore, when it detects square B sitting inside a shadow, it automatically and unconsciously lightens your perception of it, compensating for the lack of light so you can recognize its true color. Your brain is actively editing your vision in real time, rewriting the objective truth to serve a higher functional purpose. It teaches us a humbling human lesson. Our judgments of people and situations are rarely objective. We are hardwired to distort facts based on the surrounding shadows, proving that no truth can be viewed completely in isolation. Have you ever glanced over at a ticking wall clock or looked at a digital timer and felt a sudden jolt because the very first second seemed to stretch out forever? You watch the second hand, frozen in space for what feels like 2 full seconds, before it finally resumes its normal, rhythmic ticking. You aren't crazy, and time didn't hitch. You have just experienced a temporal illusion called chronostasis, the moment your brain literally pauses your internal clock to hide a blind spot in your life. To understand chronostasis, we have to look at what happens when you quickly move your eyes from one point to another, a movement called a saccade. If your brain kept your visual feed running during a rapid eye movement, your vision would become a dizzying, nauseating blur of smeared colors, making it impossible to spot predators or red terrain. To protect you, your brain completely shuts off your visual awareness during the eye movement. But it cannot leave you with a scary gap of black emptiness in your memory. So, the moment your eyes land on the new target, like the clock, your brain takes the fresh image and stretches it backward in time, pasting it over the period when you were functionally blind. Your brain literally rewrites your memory of the past fraction of a second, convincing you that you were looking at the clock longer than you actually were. It shows how deeply protective our minds are, willing to bend time itself just to keep our experience of life feeling seamless and safe. You are walking down a busy street, deep in thought, when suddenly you feel a distinct, familiar, rhythmic buzzing sensation right against your thigh. Your phone is vibrating. You instinctively reach down, pull it out of your pocket, and light up the screen, only to find total silence. No messages, no missed calls, no notifications. Your phone didn't buzz. Your body generated a physical, tactile sensation out of pure anticipation, a modern neurological illusion born from our toxic relationship with technology. Known clinically as phantom vibration syndrome, this modern illusion affects up to 90% of smartphone users. It occurs because of a psychological process called signal detection theory. Your brain is constantly bombarded with chaotic sensory noise. The friction of clothes against your skin, muscle twitches, or the rustle of the wind. Because we live in a state of high social anxiety, constantly anticipating text messages or validation from social media, our brain tunes its internal filters to be hypervigilant. It interprets a completely random, innocent muscle twitch as a phone vibration because it thinks missing a call is worse than creating a false alarm. Your brain is literally hallucinating a mechanical buzz out of your own biological tissues to keep you connected. It shows how deeply our digital tools have rewired our physical nervous systems, turning our modern anxieties into real, tangible ghosts that haunt our skin. Imagine walking through a museum and coming across a hollow plastic mask of a famous historical figure, molded inward like a jelly mold. As you walk past it and look directly into the concave, hollow back of the mask, your brain snaps. Instead of seeing a hollow indentation, you see a normal, solid, three-dimensional face sticking outward toward you. Even as you walk to the side, the hollow face seems to creepily turn its eyes, tracking your movements across the room, refusing to let you see its true, empty shape. This is the hollow face illusion, and it works because your brain is a stubborn Bayesian predictor. From the moment you were born, you have looked at thousands of human faces. Every single one of those faces had a nose sticking outward, cheeks curving forward, and eyes set in a convex structure. Your brain has formed an ironclad, unbreakable rule. Faces are always convex. They never curve inward. When you look at the hollow back of a mask, the sensory data says, this is concave. But the brain's top-down expectation screams, impossible. The brain completely overrides the raw physical data, rewriting your visual perception to force the face to pop outward. It is so powerful that even when you know it's a hollow mask, you cannot force your eyes to see the dip. It teaches us that our deep-seated biases are often stronger than physical evidence, forcing our reality to bend to match our expectations. Imagine sitting at a table with your left hand hidden completely behind a cardboard screen. In front of you, in the exact position where your real hand should be, lies a realistic rubber fake hand. A researcher takes two paintbrushes and begins stroking your hidden real hand and the visible rubber hand at the exact same time, in perfect synchronization. Within 2 minutes, something terrifying happens. You look at the fake rubber hand, and you suddenly feel the brush strokes occurring directly on the rubber. If the researcher suddenly pulls out a hammer and violently smashes the rubber hand, you will scream in genuine agony, your body releasing real adrenaline. This is the rubber hand illusion, a foundational experiment in neurobiology. It proves that your brain's mapping of your physical body is incredibly fragile and can be hacked in seconds. Your brain determines what belongs to you by matching what you see with what you feel. When it sees the rubber hand being stroked while feeling the identical sensation on your hidden real hand, it resolves the sensory coincidence by adopting the rubber hand into your body map. The brain literally shifts your sense of touch across space into the fake rubber object. It reveals that our sense of self is not locked into our meat and bones. It is a fluid, constantly updated illusion. We are highly adaptive creatures, built to absorb tools and environments into our identity, proving that the line separating the self from the external world is nothing more than a fragile boundary drawn in the sand of our neurons. Pick a tiny, sharp dot in the exact center of a blurry, colorful image and stare at it without moving your eyes for 20 seconds. Don't blink, don't look away, just lock your gaze. As the seconds tick by, something magical and unsettling happens. The vibrant colors surrounding the dot begin to fade, dissolving into a uniform, blank gray void until the entire outer image completely disappears from existence. The moment you twitch your eye, the image violently snaps back into view. You have just forced your brain to delete a piece of the world. Discovered by Ignaz Paul Vital Troxler in 1804, this effect exposes a fundamental law of sensory biology. Neurons adapt to unchanging stimuli. Your brain is an information processor that only cares about change, movement, and danger. If a sensory signal remains perfectly static, your brain categorizes it as useless background noise and systematically stops processing the signal to save metabolic energy. This happens with the smell of your own house, the sound of an air conditioner, and, through Troxler's effect, even your vision. Because your eyes make tiny, involuntary micro-movements called microsaccades, the world normally doesn't fade. But when you lock your gaze onto a single point, you stabilize the image on your retina, causing the unchanging outer colors to fade away. It teaches us a profound psychological truth. When we let our lives become completely static, predictable, and devoid of movement, we become blind to the vibrant colors that surround us. Take a photograph of a smiling, beautiful celebrity and flip it completely upside down. Now, edit the photo so that the eyes and the mouth are cut out and flipped right side up, while the rest of the head stays upside down. If you look at this inverted monster, your brain will shrug and tell you it looks totally fine, perhaps a bit quirky. But the moment you rotate the entire photograph 180 degrees into an upright position, you will gasp in horror. You are presented with a grotesque, terrifying creature resembling a demon. Your brain was completely blind to the horror as long as it was upside down. First demonstrated by Peter Thomson in 1980 using a picture of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, this illusion exposes the hyperspecialized programming of human facial recognition. Humans are evolutionary pack animals. We depend on reading facial expressions to detect social status and hostility. Because we only ever see faces upright, our brains developed a highly specialized, holistic processing module that maps faces based on the relative position of features: eyes above nose, nose above mouth. However, when a face is turned upside down, this advanced module fails completely. The brain falls back on its primitive part-by-part processing system, which looks at the eyes and mouth independently and notes they look fine, ignoring the structural nightmare connecting them. It reveals that our understanding of beauty and normalcy is highly rigid, dependent entirely on everything staying in its expected orientation, leaving us blind to profound distortions when the world is turned upside down. Imagine looking through a tiny peephole into a perfectly normal, square viewing room. Two adults walk into the room, one standing in the back left corner and the other in the back right corner. As they begin to walk toward opposite corners, a terrifying mutation occurs. The person on the left shrinks down into a tiny, doll-sized midget, while the person on the right explodes into a towering, monstrous giant whose head hits the ceiling. Your brain watches this impossible physical growth occur in real time, refusing to accept that the room itself is a distorted trap. Invented by Adelbert Ames Jr. in 1946, the Ames room is a masterpiece of forced perspective. When viewed through the single peephole with one eye, the room looks like a perfect cube. But in reality, the room is shaped like an irregular trapezoid. The back wall is built on a sharp diagonal slant, making the left corner twice as far away from the viewer as the right corner. Furthermore, the ceiling and floor are sloped at extreme, sweeping angles. Because your brain looks through a single lens, it cannot use depth perception to see the slant. It falls back on its ironclad assumption that walls are always parallel and floors are always flat. To preserve its belief in a square room, the brain forces you to perceive the people inside as shrinking and growing giants. It shows that when faced with a conflict between the integrity of an environment and the integrity of a human being, our minds will happily distort the human being to keep the environment looking orderly. Imagine undergoing a traumatic accident that forces doctors to surgically amputate your entire right arm from the shoulder down. You wake up in the hospital bed, look down, and see an empty space where your arm used to be. Yet, as you lie there, you can feel your fingers clenching into a violent, agonizing fist. You can feel an intense itch on a palm that no longer exists in the physical universe. This is the phantom limb illusion, the ultimate proof that the physical loss of a body part does not mean its presence is wiped from your mind. Phantom limbs affect over 80% of amputees, representing a deeply emotional, bittersweet neurological echo. Inside your brain's somatosensory cortex, there is a literal physical map of your body called the cortical homunculus. Every square millimeter of your skin has a corresponding territory in your brain. When a limb is physically removed, the corresponding brain territory doesn't just instantly vanish. It keeps firing its traditional signals. Even worse, neighboring territories on the brain map, like the face, can bleed into the vacant arm territory. Neurologist V.S. Ramachandran famously discovered that if you stroke an amputee's cheek with a Q-tip, they will feel it directly on their missing phantom thumb. It reveals that our internal representation of ourselves is deeply stubborn, carrying the patterns of what we used to be long after the reality of life has severed those parts away from us. Stare intently at a small black cross in the center of a circle of 12 blurry lilac-pink discs. After about 5 seconds of continuous staring, a strange anomaly appears. One of the lilac discs disappears, replaced by a gap that begins to run around the circle like a clock hand. But as the gap sprints around, it transforms into a beautiful, glowing, electric green ball that eats up the lilac discs as it runs. If you look away, you realize there was never a green ball, and the lilac discs never changed color. Your brain created a color that wasn't there out of pure exhaustion. Created by Jeremy Hinton in 2005, the Lilac Chaser combines 3 distinct illusions: Troxler fading, negative afterimages, and the phi phenomenon. When the lilac discs blink off one by one, your visual system experiences a temporary void. Because your retina's photoreceptors have been overstimulated by the pink color, they become chemically fatigued. When the pink stimulus is suddenly removed, your visual pathway experiences a rebound effect, activating your opponent color channels. For pink/magenta light, the opposing channel is green. Your brain fills the sudden void with a green afterimage. Then, your brain's motion detection circuits stitch these jumping green flashes together into a single, smooth-running ball. It is a stunning display of biological compensation, showing that when nature presents us with a sudden, recurring absence, our minds will instinctively invent a vibrant new creation to fill the void. You are lying in bed in a dark, quiet room, struggling to fall asleep. You look over at a jacket hanging over the back of a chair across the room. Suddenly, your heart rate spikes and a chill runs down your spine. You see a terrifying face staring out from the folds of the leather. Two distinct eyes, a hollow nose, and a snarling mouth. You turn on the light, and it transforms back into a jacket. This is pareidolia, an evolutionary illusion that turns the inanimate objects of our world into conscious, watching entities. Pareidolia is a deeply hardwired survival mechanism built into our fusiform face area. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, our ancestors slept in dark, predator-filled jungles. In that hostile environment, making a false positive error, thinking a bush was a hidden tiger or a rock was an enemy warrior, carried a very low survival cost. It just made you jumpy. But making a false negative error, failing to see a hidden face in the shadows, meant instant death. Consequently, evolution fine-tuned our brains to be hypersensitive face detectors, programmed to find patterns in chaotic noise. We see faces in the front grills of cars, in the craters of the moon, and in pieces of burnt toast. It shows that we live in an existential state of seeking connection and warning, meaning our minds would rather hallucinate a human face in a dark room than accept that we are completely alone in the dark. Imagine a highly experienced Wall Street stockbroker, an elite military general, or a top-tier medical doctor making a massive, definitive prediction about the future based on a complex set of data. They feel an intense, unshakable sense of internal confidence. They would swear on their life that their judgment is accurate. Yet, statistical analysis proves that their predictions are no more accurate than a coin toss. They are victims of the illusion of validity, a devastating cognitive distortion where internal confidence is mistaken for objective truth. Coined by the legendary psychologist Daniel Kahneman, the illusion of validity reveals a dangerous glitch in human decision-making. Our brains crave narrative consistency and order. When we are presented with a lot of data that seems to tell a neat, coherent story, our brains trigger a powerful feeling of cognitive ease and confidence. We confuse the internal consistency of a story with the predictive accuracy of that story in the real world. Even when professionals are presented with hard statistical proof that their past predictions failed miserably, their subjective feeling of confidence remains completely untouched. It teaches us a vital, humbling lesson about the human condition. Just because you feel completely, passionately certain about a belief or a choice inside your heart doesn't mean the universe is obligated to agree with you. Draw a thick, solid vertical black pillar down the middle of a page. Now, draw a straight, continuous diagonal line passing behind that pillar from the bottom left to the top right. If you look at the paper, your eyes will tell you a lie. The line emerging from the right side of the pillar looks completely mismatched, appearing shifted upward and disconnected from the line on the left. If you lay a physical ruler across the page, you will find they align perfectly down to the millimeter. Your brain has physically bent a straight line inside your mind. Discovered by Johann Poggendorff in 1860, this illusion exposes a glitch in how our visual cortex processes angles. When a diagonal line meets a vertical edge, our brain struggles to accurately calculate the exact degree of the sharp angle. To make things simpler and quicker to process, the brain's orientation-selective neurons systematically exaggerate acute angles, pushing them closer to \BM 90°/circ inside our perception. This internal angular expansion forces the two segments of the line to look completely misaligned. It is an incredible demonstration of how our pursuit of mental efficiency can cause structural distortions. It serves as a great metaphor for human relationships. When a massive barrier or misunderstanding gets dropped down the middle of our communication, the things that were once perfectly aligned can end up looking completely warped and disconnected inside our minds. Place a medium-sized orange circle on a screen and surround it with a ring of massive, towering grapefruit-sized gray circles. Now, place an identical orange circle right next to it, but surround it with a ring of tiny, pea-sized gray circles. If you look at the two orange circles, your brain will scream that the second one is twice as large as the first. Your eyes refuse to accept they are physically identical down to the pixel, proving that your perception of an object's value and size is entirely dictated by who it stands next to. Also known as Titchener circles, the Ebbinghaus illusion reveals that human perception is fundamentally comparative rather than absolute. Our visual cortex processes size by analyzing the contrast between an object and its immediate surroundings. The large surrounding shapes crowd out and diminish the first circle, while the tiny surrounding shapes amplify and elevate the second. This illusion doesn't just happen on paper. It is the driving psychological engine of our social lives. When we surround ourselves with hyper-successful, wealthy, or beautiful people, we instinctively perceive ourselves as small and diminished. When we change our context, our self-worth shifts instantly. It reminds us that our feelings of inadequacy are often nothing more than a biological contrast illusion, showing that our true scale is entirely dependent on the circles we choose to run in. Think about your group of friends, your family, or your coworkers. If I asked you how well you understand yourself, you'd say \BM 100%. If I asked you how well they understand you, you'd scoff and say they only see the surface. But if I asked you how well you understand them, you would confidently declare that you can read them like an open book, knowing their secret motives and flaws. This is the illusion of asymmetric insight, a universal psychological delusion where we believe we possess a magical X-ray vision into others, while believing everyone else is completely blind to us. This cognitive illusion breeds massive conflict in human relationships. It stems from a basic asymmetry in information processing. We experience our own rich, chaotic internal monologues, our doubts, our intentions, and our private pain. We know how complex we are, but we cannot experience anyone else's internal world. We only see their public behaviors and words. Because our brains are inherently lazy storytellers, we take their outward actions and simplify them into neat, shallow archetypes, convinced we have unlocked their souls. We deny others the very depth, nuance, and complexity that we claim for ourselves. It is a profound call for humility, reminding us that every single human being we meet is walking through a private, deeply layered storm that we are completely unqualified to judge. Find a massive, roaring waterfall out in nature and lock your gaze onto a single rock face directly behind the rushing torrent of water for 60 seconds. Watch the liquid mass plunge downward without moving your eyes. Now, suddenly shift your gaze over to the solid, ancient rock cliff next to the waterfall. You will gasp as the solid, unmoving stone appears to defy physics, actively sliding and flowing upward toward the sky like a liquid wave, while maintaining its solid shape. Known scientifically as the motion after effect, MAE. This illusion was described by Aristotle and famously mapped by Robert Adams in 1834. Inside your visual cortex, you have specialized neurons dedicated to detecting directional motion. Some look for downward movement, others for upward movement. In a normal environment, these neurons fire at a resting baseline, balancing each other out so static objects look static. When you stare at a waterfall for a minute, your downward motion neurons fire continuously until they become completely exhausted and chemically depleted. When you look away at a static rock, the downward neurons drop below their baseline, leaving the fresh, rested upward motion neurons to dominate the signal. Your brain processes an upward movement signal even though the image on your retina is stationary. It shows that when we spend too much time focused on a single, continuous pattern of negativity or motion, the static world around us will start to warp in the opposite direction. Draw two identical, flat, horizontal black lines on a page, one stacked neatly on top of the other. Now, draw two long diagonal lines that flank them, slanting inward like railroad tracks stretching toward a distant horizon. If you look at the page, your mind will confidently tell you that the top horizontal line is significantly longer and wider than the bottom line. If you take a pair of scissors and cut them out, you will find they are twins. Your brain has physically stretched a line to match a fake distance. Demonstrated by Mario Ponzo in 1911, this illusion reveals how deeply embedded our three-dimensional spatial processing is within our flat, two-dimensional vision. Your brain treats the converging diagonal lines as linear perspective cues, interpreting them as a path stretching far away into the distance. Because the top line sits higher up the track, your brain calculates that it must be further away in space. If an object is further away but casts the exact same size image on your retina as an object close by, the distant object must physically be much larger in the real world to achieve that feat. Your brain automatically inflates your perception of the top line size to match this depth calculation. It shows that our brains are constantly staging a quiet, mathematical intervention behind the scenes, altering our immediate visual reality to make sense of a world built on perspective. Look at a beautiful graphic composition made of multiple rings of tiny, tilted, colorful squares surrounding a central black dot. Keep your eyes locked on that center dot and slowly move your head forward toward the screen, then slowly pull your head back away from it. As you move your head, the static rings of squares will suddenly come alive. They will start to actively spin and rotate in opposite directions like a complex mechanical gearbox or a clicking safe combination. Stop moving your head, and the gears instantly lock tight. Discovered by Banjo Pinna and Gavin Brelstaff in 2000, this illusion exploits the orientation selective cells in our visual cortex that process motion vectors. The tiny squares in the rings are deliberately tilted at a specific angle relative to the radii of the circle. When you move your head forward, the image expands across your retina, creating a radial outward motion. Because the squares are tilted, this outward movement forces the light rays to strike your motion-sensitive neurons diagonally. Your brain cannot distinguish this expanding diagonal shift from a physical rotation of the circle. It takes the easiest computational route, interpreting the expansion as a spinning wheel. It stands as an incredible reminder that our movement through space actively shapes the reality we perceive, transforming static, dead patterns into dynamic dances of motion simply because we chose to move. Draw two identical horizontal lines of the exact same length side by side. On the first line, draw small arrowheads at each end pointing inward, like a traditional weapon, \BM, \left arrow, \right arrow. On the second line, draw the arrowheads pointing outward, like a pair of open wings, \BM, \right arrow, \left arrow. If you look at them, your brain will lie to you, insisting that the line with the outward wings is significantly longer than the line with the inward arrows. This illusion is so powerful that it actually changes based on the type of house you grew up in as a child. First described by Franz Karl Mullerlyer in 1889, this illusion reveals that our visual processing is deeply shaped by our architectural culture. Cross-cultural psychological studies have shown that people who grow up in modern carpentered societies, filled with square concrete buildings, straight hallways, and sharp rectangular corners, are incredibly vulnerable to this illusion. Our brains interpret the outward wings as the interior corner of a room that is stretching away from us in depth, and the inward arrows as the exterior corner of a building poking out toward us. Conversely, indigenous tribes who live in circular huts and open nature are completely immune to this illusion. They see the lines as perfectly equal. It shows that the physical environments we build around ourselves during our childhoods literally wire our neural circuitry, altering how we calculate length and distance for the rest of our lives. Imagine being locked inside a specialized, high-tech sensory deprivation chamber. It is pitch black, completely soundproof, and you float in warm salt water that matches your exact skin temperature. You feel no weight, hear no sound, and see no light. Within just 48 hours of this absolute silence, your mind will collapse into a wild, untamed circus. You will see blinding kaleidoscope geometries, hear full orchestral symphonies, and feel physical entities touching your skin. Your brain will aggressively build a world out of nothing. This terrifying phenomenon reveals that human consciousness is a ravenous consumer of data. Your brain's sensory systems operate on a baseline of neural activity, constantly filtering out steady streams of external information. When you plunge a human being into absolute sensory isolation, the brain's incoming data line drops to zero. Terrified by this silence and starving for input, the brain dials up its internal amplification system to maximum capacity. It takes the tiny, random, subatomic static noise naturally firing inside your neurons and amplifies it into full-blown sensory realities. Your mind literally starts dreaming while wide awake to prevent cognitive death. It teaches us a beautiful, comforting truth about the human spirit. We are fundamentally built to experience, to feel, and to create. Even if you lock a soul in the deepest, darkest void imaginable, it will use its own internal light to paint a universe. Watch a bright blue ring moving smoothly across a dark screen in a continuous circle. Suddenly, at the exact microsecond the ring passes the 12 o'clock mark, a bright red dot flashes directly inside the center of the ring. If you watch the screen, your eyes will play a bizarre trick on you. You will see the red dot flash significantly behind the moving blue ring, as if the ring has already left it in the dust. In reality, they were perfectly aligned. Your brain has physically pushed the ring forward into the future. The flash lag effect exposes a massive latency problem in human biology. When light hits your retina, it takes your brain roughly 100 milliseconds to process that data, build a visual image, and push it into your conscious awareness. This means we are technically living 100 milliseconds in the past. If your brain just showed you raw data, you would constantly miss catching balls, trip over moving objects, and fail to dodge threats. To solve this, when your brain tracks an object moving in a predictable path, it uses its internal physics engine to predict where that object will be 100 milliseconds in the future and renders it at that predicted location in your mind. But when a sudden flash occurs, like the red dot, the brain has no past data to predict its path, so it renders it in its actual historical past position. You are witnessing a beautiful, living conflict between prediction and history inside your own head. Take a circular wooden top and paint it purely in black and white, half of it solid black, and the other half covered in a series of thin, concentric black arc lines on a white background. There is absolutely no color on this disc. Now, spin the top rapidly under a bright white light lamp. As the disc blurs together, you will gasp as the black and white lines completely vanish, replaced by vibrant, glowing rings of pastel green, dark blue, and rusty red running around the spinning wheel. Spin it backward, and the colors instantly reverse. Invented by toy maker Charles Benham in 1894, this illusion remains one of the most elegant mysteries of visual neuroscience. It works because the different color cones in your retina, red, green, and blue, have completely different latency speeds. Red cones react incredibly fast but take a long time to shut off, while blue cones are sluggish to turn on but drop instantly to zero. When the black and white patterns on Benham's top spin past your eye, They create rapid, rhythmic pulses of light and shadow. These pulses flash at the exact frequencies that outsync your retinal cones, activating them unevenly. Your brain receives a scrambled signal where the red channel fires before the green channel, a pattern it normally only receives when looking at real physical colors. Your mind interprets this temporal mess as real hues, proving that color is nothing more than a rhythmic song played on the keys of our neurons. Imagine standing up in front of a massive crowd of people to give a presentation, or sitting across from your crush on a first date. Your heart is pounding against your ribs, your throat is dry, and you feel an overwhelming wave of internal panic. You are completely convinced that everyone in the room can look right through your skin and see your terror written across your face in flashing neon letters. But if you look at a video recording of yourself later, you will see a perfectly calm, collected, and normal human being. You are a victim of the illusion of transparency. This universal psychological illusion stems from our profound egocentric bias. We are trapped inside our own minds, experiencing our internal states with absolute, overwhelming vividness. Because we are so intensely aware of our own thoughts, anxieties, and feelings, our brains commit a profound cognitive error. They assume that our internal experience must easily bleed outward into the physical world for everyone else to see. In reality, other people are completely blind to your internal storm. They are too busy trapped inside their own heads, worrying about their own secret transparency illusions. It is a deeply liberating and comforting realization for anyone suffering from social anxiety. Your skin is an incredibly powerful fortress, and the vulnerabilities you think are on display are completely hidden from the world. Draw a large black grid on a white page, creating a series of massive black squares separated by clean, intersecting white streets. If you look directly at any single intersection where the white lines cross, it looks perfectly clean and white. But if you look at the intersection in your peripheral vision, a series of dark, ghostly gray smudges and black dots will suddenly flash into existence, dancing around the edges of your gaze. Try to look directly at a gray dot to catch it, and it instantly vanishes like a ghost. Discovered by Ludimar Hermann in 1870, the Hermann grid illusion exposes how our eyes trade clarity for survival through a neural process called lateral inhibition. Inside your retina, neighboring light receptor cells are wired to actively suppress and fight each other to sharpen the edges of your vision, acting like a built-in contrast dial. An intersection receives a massive amount of white light from 4 different directions, causing the surrounding receptors to fire intensely and shut down the central receptor. In your sharp center of vision, your receptors are packed so tightly that this effect is minimized. But in your blurry peripheral vision, the receptors are large and spaced out, causing the lateral shutdown to create a noticeable drop in perceived brightness, which manifests as a gray smudge. It shows that our peripheral vision is a messy place of compromises, willing to invent shadows where none exist just to keep the edges of our world looking sharp. Put on a high-quality pair of headphones and play an audio loop composed of 2 simple, meaningless, overlapping syllables like tiga tiga or nopa repeating continuously at high speed. The left ear plays the sound slightly out of phase with the right ear. Sit in a dark room and listen to this audio static for 3 minutes. Within moments, your brain will hijack the audio. You will hear distinct, clear English words emerging from the static. Words like danger, love, no money, or come here. The words you hear will be completely unique to you, pulled directly from your subconscious. Discovered by the pioneering auditory psychologist Diana Deutsch, the phantom word effect reveals that your brain is a desperate pattern finder that cannot tolerate acoustic chaos. When presented with ambiguous, meaningless auditory static, the top-down processing centers of your brain treat it as a puzzle. The auditory cortex pulls words from your immediate thoughts, stresses, memories, and linguistic habits, forcing the acoustic static to reshape itself into those specific words. It acts exactly like an auditory Rorschach inkblot test. If you are stressed about finances, you will hear no money. If you are lonely, you will hear love. It is a profound, intimate demonstration that the voice we hear speaking to us out of the chaos of the world is often nothing more than the echo of our own hearts whispering their secrets back to us. Look at a drawing of two elegant wooden tables. The first table looks long, thin, and narrow, stretching vertically up the page. The second table looks perfectly square, fat, and wide, sitting horizontally. If I told you that the two tabletops are physically identical down to the millimeter, that you could cut the first tabletop out and paste it perfectly over the second one without an inch of overlap, you would laugh at me. Yet, if you use a physical tracing paper to check, you will find they are clones. Created by legendary cognitive scientist Roger Shepard in 1990, this is one of the most powerful geometric illusions in existence. It works because our brains possess an automatic, unyielding \BM 3\text D interpretation engine that cannot be turned off when looking at a \BM 2\text D page. Our visual system interprets the vertical slanting lines of the first table as stretching away from us into deep perspective space. Our brain automatically applies an internal scaling factor to compensate for foreshortening, mentally lengthening the vertical line because it thinks it is traveling into depth. The horizontal lines of the second table do not trigger this depth scaling. It shows that our perception of volume, space, and distance is entirely distorted by the orientation of the angles, proving that our minds can easily look at two identical situations in life and judge them as completely different based on how they are tilted. Draw a series of identical horizontal black stripes across a white background. Now draw 12 small, uniform circles and place them across the stripes. Fill all 12 circles with the exact same shade of bright turquoise blue paint. Finally, pass the black stripes over the top of 6 circles and let the white spaces pass over the top of the other 6. The result is shocking. The first 6 circles look like a dark, metallic navy blue, while the other 6 look like a bright, glowing minty green. Your eyes refuse to see the unified turquoise truth. The Munker-White illusion demonstrates a complex visual processing mechanism called lightness assimilation. Classical contrast theories suggest that a dark background should make an object look lighter. But here, the opposite happens. The circles absorb and assimilate the lightness values of the lines that cross directly over them. This happens because our visual cortex processes color and form simultaneously through specialized neural pathways called double opponent cells. The brain groups the circle and the crossing line into a single visual unit before calculating the final color output. It serves as a beautiful, profound metaphor for human character. We don't live in a vacuum. The structural lines and systems that cross through our lives will inevitably bleed into our identity, changing how the world perceives our color, no matter what our true foundation is. Sit in front of a dark screen and watch a single, bright white dot flash onto the screen for a fraction of a millisecond. At the exact same time the dot flashes, your headphones play 2 sharp, rapid acoustic beeps. Beep, beep. If you ask your brain what happened, your eyes will swear on their life that they saw 2 separate white dots flash onto the screen in rapid succession. You didn't just hear an extra beep. Your ears physically forced your visual cortex to construct an extra flash of light out of pure thin air. Discovered by Leighton Shams in 2000, this cross-modal illusion shattered the old scientific belief that our senses operate as completely separate, isolated information pipelines. It reveals that our auditory system is significantly faster and more precise at processing time than our visual system. When a visual event occurs within a tiny window of time alongside multiple auditory events, the brain assumes they must have come from the exact same physical source. To resolve the contradiction between one visual flash and 2 auditory beeps, the visual cortex yields to the auditory cortex, creating a visual hallucination of a second flash to align with the sound. It shows how deeply cooperative and fragile our perception is. We do not see with our eyes or hear with our ears. We perceive with a unified mind that is constantly blending the senses to make sense of the world's chaos. Take a circular disc filled with a highly detailed, sharp, high-contrast static texture of black and white dots. Place this disc against a plain, solid gray background. It looks beautifully crisp and clear. Now, take an identical disc of the exact same texture, but surround it with a massive outer ring of an ultra-high contrast, blindingly intense black and white pattern. If you look at the two discs side by side, the second disc will suddenly look incredibly faded, washed out and blurry, as if someone dropped a thick layer of fog over it. The Chubb illusion, mapped in 1989, exposes a visual processing flaw called gain control. Your visual system uses an automatic brightness and contrast dial, similar to the auto exposure feature on a smartphone camera. When your brain encounters an environment filled with extreme, blinding contrast, it automatically turns down the sensitivity dial of its cortical neurons to protect your vision from overexposure. As a result, the inner disk's contrast is aggressively turned down inside your perception, making it look faded and washed out. This illusion is a powerful psychological reminder of how our environments dictate our perceived intensity. When you place a normal, nuanced situation inside a loud, highly polarized, and chaotic environment, the quiet truth becomes completely washed out and invisible to the naked eye. If I pulled 100 random people off the street and asked them to rate their own intelligence, driving ability, or professional skills compared to the average human, about /BM 70% would claim they are above average, a mathematical impossibility known as the better than average effect. But if I asked them to rate their own honesty, kindness, fairness, and moral integrity compared to the rest of humanity, that number skyrockets to an insane /BM 95%. Almost every single human being alive carries a profound psychological illusion that they are fundamentally a better, holier person than everyone else. Extensively researched by social psychologists, the illusion of moral superiority is one of the most destructive and stubborn cognitive biases in human history. It functions as a powerful psychological immune system designed to protect our self-esteem and alleviate the crushing weight of guilt. When we commit a moral error, we judge ourselves based on our internal good intentions and contextual excuses. But when we see others commit the exact same error, we judge them purely on their outward behavior, writing it off as a structural character flaw. This double standard creates a massive empathy blind spot, allowing nations, political groups, and individuals to commit horrific acts of hostility while wrapped in a comfortable blanket of absolute self-righteous certainty. It teaches us that true enlightenment begins when we stop assuming our own sainthood and realize we are all capable of darkness. Look at a large graphic made of thousands of tiny, alternating vertical and horizontal black and white bar lines. In the exact center of this pattern sits a circular cutout ring filled with the exact same lines, but rotated /BM 90°/circ. If you look at the circle and gently sway your head from side to side, or scroll the page up and down, your brain will break. The central circle will completely decouple from the background, physically floating, sliding, and drifting across the page like an island of ice moving across water. Named after Japanese artist Hajime Aoki in 1977, this illusion reveals how our visual system separates an object from its background, a process called figure-ground segregation. Inside your primary visual cortex, you have separate neural circuits for tracking horizontal eye movements and vertical eye movements. Because the background and the foreground circles contain lines oriented at perpendicular angles, your tiny eye micromovements, microsaccades, stimulate these two neural circuits unevenly. Your brain struggles to integrate these conflicting motion signals into a single, cohesive image. To resolve the computational confusion, the brain concludes that the circle and the background must be two completely independent physical layers moving through space at different depths. It stands as an incredible proof of how easily a completely flat, static piece of paper can be tricked into a dynamic, multi-layered dance of three-dimensional depth. Imagine walking past a newly constructed cafe wall made of beautiful alternating black and white bricks. The contractor has laid them out in neat horizontal rows, separated by thin lines of gray mortar. But as you look at the wall, you feel dizzy. The rows of bricks look completely crooked, slanting and zigzagging across the wall at wild, drunken angles. You pull out a spirit level and press it against the mortar line, only to find it is perfectly, flawlessly straight and horizontal. Your brain has shattered the architecture of the room. First observed on the wall of a cafe in Bristol in 1973 by Richard Gregory, this illusion works because of how our visual system processes luminance and borders. The trick requires the mortar lines to be a specific shade of intermediate gray, sitting perfectly between the brightness of the white bricks and the darkness of the black bricks. When your retina tracks the high-contrast borders where the black and white bricks meet across the gray line, it experiences a localized neural distortion called luminance phase shifting. Your orientation-sensitive cortical cells interpret this contrast shift as a physical tilt in the line. The brain scales up this tiny error across the entire length of the wall, turning a perfectly straight grid into a chaotic zigzag. It shows that our perception of structure can be easily corrupted by minor shifts in contrast, making straight realities look profoundly crooked inside our minds. Sit down in a quiet room and think about a major decision you made recently. Why you chose your current job, why you bought your car, or why you fell in love with your partner. You feel an intense sense of clarity. You can track your logical steps perfectly inside your head. But psychological experiments prove that this internal narrative is often a complete work of fiction. Your brain makes decisions using primitive, unconscious survival drives, and then completely manufactures a logical story afterward to trick you into thinking you are in control. Known as the introspection illusion, this phenomenon reveals that we are profoundly blind to the inner workings of our own minds. In a famous experiment by Nisbet and Wilson, researchers placed 4 identical nylon stockings on a table and asked consumers to pick the best one. Almost all participants picked the stocking on the far right. When asked why, they launched into long, intellectual explanations about texture, weave quality, and light reflection. In reality, all 4 stockings were identical clones from the same factory box. The participants simply preferred the right side due to a basic spatial bias. Their brains had completely fabricated an elegant, logical lie to justify an unconscious choice. It teaches us a humbling human lesson. We are not the directors of our minds. We are merely the public relations officers, writing clean scripts to explain a wild, unconscious world we don't control. Take 3 black Pac-Man shapes and arrange them on a page so their open mouths are facing inward toward each other. Now place 3 sharp V-shaped angles between them. If you look at the composition, your eyes will instantly see a bright, solid white equilateral triangle floating on top of the shapes. This phantom triangle looks significantly brighter and whiter than the surrounding paper, and it has clean, sharp physical boundary lines. If you place a magnifying glass over those borders, you will find nothing but empty white paper. Created by Gaetano Canizza in 1955, this illusion exposes our brain's obsession with Gestalt principles of closure and continuity. Your visual system hates meaningless, fragmented shapes. When it sees 3 Pac-Man shapes pointing inward, it refuses to accept them as random, broken circles. The brain's top-down processing centers conclude that there must be a solid white triangle sitting on top of the composition, physically blocking out the missing pieces of the circles. To enforce this logical conclusion, the visual cortex actively generates a boundary line out of thin air, boosting the neural firing rates along the phantom edge to make the triangle look brighter. Your brain is literally hallucinating structure to make sense of emptiness, proving that our minds will eagerly paint a beautiful white lie across our reality rather than tolerate a chaotic, meaningless void. Walk out into a vibrant rose garden on a hot, sunny afternoon. The red roses look blindingly bright and fiery, completely dominating the deep green and blue foliage surrounding them. Now, sit quietly in that garden as the sun sets and twilight takes over the sky. As the light fades into deep dusk, a bizarre, haunting color transformation occurs. The fiery red roses completely lose their luster, turning into a dull, dark, almost black hue, while the green and blue leaves suddenly glow with a weird, luminous, and intense brightness. The world has completely inverted its color priorities. Discovered by Jan Evangelista Purkinje in 1819, this shift reveals a beautiful biological transition occurring inside your eyes as day turns to night. Your retina relies on two completely different photoreceptor systems: cones for bright daylight vision, which are hypersensitive to long wavelengths like red, and rods for dim low-light vision, which are fine-tuned to short wavelengths like blue and green. During the twilight transition, known as mesopic vision, both systems are active simultaneously. As the light drops, your colorblind rods take over the processing load, automatically amplifying the green and blue photons while letting the red photons drop into total darkness. It is a stunning visual metaphor for adaptation. When the bright sun of our lives sets, the things that once dominated our attention fade away, forcing our minds to activate hidden systems that find beauty and light in the cold, quiet blues of the dark. Draw a thick vertical line down the middle of a screen. On the left side of the line, paint a rectangle using a solid, uniform shade of dark gray. On the right side, paint an identical rectangle using the exact same shade of gray. Now apply a tiny gradient right at the central borderline, making the left edge fractionally darker and the right edge fractionally lighter. If you look at the screen, your eyes will tell you a massive lie. The entire left rectangle looks like a dark charcoal block, while the entire right rectangle looks like a pale silver sheet. If you block out the center line with your finger, the illusion vanishes instantly. The Craig-O'Brien-Cornsweet illusion reveals that our visual cortex is incredibly lazy and efficient. Processing the exact color and brightness value of every single pixel across your entire field of view requires a massive amount of neural energy. To save power, your brain focuses almost all its computational resources purely on the sharp edges where objects meet. When it reads the tiny gradient at the central border, it quickly generalizes that information across the entire shape, assuming that if the edge is dark, the whole block must be dark. The brain literally copies and pastes the edge data to fill in the rest of the shape. It shows how easily our minds can be manipulated by a tiny piece of distorted data placed right at the border of our awareness, changing how we judge an entire situation based on a single edge of contrast. Draw a simple, two-dimensional wireframe outline of a cube on a piece of paper using intersecting lines. Look at it quietly for 30 seconds. As you stare at it, your brain will enter a state of strange instability. The front face of the cube will suddenly snap, jumping into the back of the drawing, forcing the cube to flip its orientation in space. Continue staring and it will snap back. Your brain cannot keep the drawing stable. It is locked in a continuous, rhythmic civil war, bouncing back and forth between two parallel realities. First published in 1832 by Louis Albert Necker, this bistable optical illusion exposes the limits of cognitive ambiguity. Because the two-dimensional drawing lacks any depth cues like shadows or perspective lines, the raw sensory data entering your eye can be interpreted in two equally logical, valid three-dimensional ways. Your brain hates uncertainty. It is legally programmed to choose a single, definitive truth. But because both interpretations are perfectly equal, The brain's neural networks cannot declare a permanent winner. The primary interpretation network fires continuously until its neurotransmitters become fatigued, allowing the secondary network to take over and flip the cube inside your mind. It is a beautiful, comforting proof of human mental flexibility, showing that when we are presented with an ambiguous situation in life, our minds are naturally capable of seeing multiple distinct truths, shifting our entire perspective simply by looking long enough. Imagine deciding that you want to buy a very specific model of a car, say a bright red Honda Civic. You spent hours researching it online last night. You step outside your house the next morning to walk to work, and your jaw drops. The streets are completely flooded with red Honda Civics. You see one parked outside your house, two pass you at the intersection, and another is parked at your office. You feel a wave of weird paranoia, convinced that the universe is playing a trick on you. It isn't. The cars were always there. Your brain was just throwing them in the trash. Also known as the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, this cognitive illusion is driven by two powerful mental mechanisms: selective attention and confirmation bias. Your brain is exposed to millions of pieces of data every second, most of which are completely useless for your immediate survival. To keep you sane, an internal gatekeeper called the reticular activating system, RAS, filters out \BM 99% of the world, treating it as background noise. When you spend hours thinking about a red car, your brain marks that specific pattern as highly important. The next day, the gatekeeper opens the door, actively alerting your conscious awareness every single time the pattern appears. The sudden wave of sightings feels like a cosmic coincidence, but it is actually a beautiful proof of internal alignment. When you shift your focus toward a specific goal or idea, your brain actively rewrites your reality to help you find it. Imagine sitting in a completely silent, padded room. There are no electronics, no wind, and no voices. Yet, as you sit there in the absolute quiet, you hear a sharp, high-pitched, metallic ringing sound ringing inside your skull. It sounds like an old television set or a distant siren. You cover your ears, but the sound doesn't change volume. This is tinnitus, a haunting auditory illusion where your brain constructs a permanent ghost sound out of the silence of its own broken wiring. Tinnitus affects millions of people worldwide, representing a deeply emotional struggle with internal noise. It usually begins when the tiny, microscopic hair cells inside your inner ear, cochlea, become damaged due to loud noise exposure or aging, cutting off their traditional signal transmission to the brain. Just like the phantom limb phenomenon, the auditory cortex of your brain reacts to this sudden silence with panic. It refuses to accept the lack of input. It dials up its internal amplification system, increasing the sensitivity of its central neurons until they begin to fire spontaneously out of pure metabolic stress. Your brain interprets this internal neural static as a physical, external screech. It shows that our minds are deeply afraid of emptiness. When the external world stops speaking to us, our brain will turn up its own internal static until it screams, desperate to keep the conversation going. Watch a dark screen. On the left side, a bright red dot flashes for a fraction of a millisecond. A tiny gap of empty black space follows, and then a bright green dot flashes on the right side of the screen. If you watch this sequence, your eyes will tell you a breathtaking lie. You will see a single dot smoothly slide across the screen from left to right. But the craziest part? Your brain will swear that as the dot reached the exact middle of its empty journey, it actively changed its color from red to green. Your mind has predicted the future before it ever happened. First mapped by Paul Kohlers and Michael von Grunow in 1976, the color phi phenomenon is a devastating blow to our belief in real-time consciousness. Think about the physics. The green dot has not flashed yet while the red dot is sliding across the empty middle space. How could your brain know what color the dot would turn before the green light ever hit your retina? The answer is mind-bending. You do not experience the world in real time. You experience it as a delayed, edited movie tape. Your brain waits for both flashes to occur, processes the entire sequence over a fraction of a second, and then creates a smooth, animated illusion of motion and color change. It then pushes this edited narrative into your conscious memory. It proves that our immediate experience of the present moment is a completely retrospective construction, showing that we are always living in a beautifully edited history of what just happened. Think about an ordinary, everyday object that you use every single week, like a standard zipper on your jacket, a flush toilet, or a bicycle. If I asked you if you understand how a bicycle works, you would smile and say, "Of course I do, it's incredibly simple." But if I handed you a blank piece of paper and a pen and commanded you to draw the exact mechanical chain layout, gears, and pedal connections to make the wheels turn safely, your mind would completely freeze. You will realize you have absolutely no idea how it works. Coined by psychologists Leonid Rosenblatt and Frank Kiel, the illusion of explanatory depth exposes our profound intellectual laziness. Because we live in a world surrounded by highly functional tools, our brains confuse our familiarity with an object for a deep functional understanding of that object. We outsource our knowledge to the environment, tracking only the surface-level inputs and outputs. You press a pedal, the bike moves. When we are forced to actually explain the internal mechanisms step by step, our cognitive illusion collapses, exposing a massive cavern of ignorance. It is a powerful, humbling call for intellectual modesty. It reminds us that we are all walking through a highly complex world wrapped in a false sense of expertise, showing that true wisdom begins the moment we admit how little we actually know about the mechanisms driving our lives. Project a flat, two-dimensional shadow of a wireframe object onto a translucent screen. When the wire object is completely still, the shadow looks like a chaotic, meaningless jumble of flat, intersecting lines on a white wall. It looks like a child's messy scribble. But the moment you rotate the physical wire object behind the lamp, a miracle occurs on the wall. The flat shadow instantly snaps into a majestic, towering three-dimensional sculpture that spins with incredible depth, volume, and geometric structure. First investigated by Hans Wallach in 1944, the kinetic depth effect reveals how our brain uses movement to decode dimension. A flat retina can only receive a flat, two-dimensional projection of light. To build a three-dimensional world, your visual cortex relies heavily on dynamic motion vectors. When the lines of the shadow change their length and position in relation to each other during rotation, the brain's motion processing centers calculate the exact angular velocity of every point. It uses this movement data to compute depth, automatically transforming a flat distortion on a wall into a solid three-dimensional object inside your mind. It serves as an inspiring metaphor for life. When we look at a situation from a completely static, frozen perspective, it can look like a meaningless, chaotic jumble of lines. But the moment we introduce movement and rotate our perspective, the chaos resolves into a beautiful, multi-dimensional truth. Put on a pair of sunglasses, but pop out the left lens entirely, leaving your right eye covered by the dark glass and your left eye completely naked. Now, stand in front of a swinging pendulum moving back and forth in a straight horizontal line across the room. As you look at it through your mismatched eyes, your brain will completely break physics. The pendulum will cease to move in a flat line. It will magically transform into a three-dimensional ellipse, swinging out toward your body in a massive circular loop before sweeping away into the depth of the room. Discovered by Carl Pulfrich in 1922, this illusion exposes the physical processing speed of our visual hardware. When light enters your right eye through the dark sunglass lens, the drop in illumination forces your retina to process the image significantly slower, taking about 10 milliseconds longer than your naked left eye. When you track a moving object like a pendulum, your brain receives two conflicting inputs simultaneously. Your left eye shows where the pendulum is right now, while your right eye shows where it was 10 milliseconds ago. Because the object is moving horizontally, this temporal delay creates a spatial mismatch, which your brain's binocular depth engine interprets as a stereoscopic depth difference. The brain forces you to see a circular \BM3\text D loop to resolve the time lag. It teaches us that when our access to information is unevenly dimmed, our minds will warp the geometry of the world just to bridge the gap. Stare at a screen showing a grid of alternating red and black horizontal lines for 5 minutes. Then switch your gaze to a grid of green and black vertical lines for another 5 minutes. Go back and forth until your eyes are completely exhausted. Now, look at a plain black and white grid of vertical and horizontal lines. You will gasp in shock. The black and white lines are gone. The horizontal lines look intensely green, and the vertical lines look intensely pink. But here is the terrifying part. This isn't a temporary flash. If you look at a black and white grid tomorrow, or even 3 months from now, the fake colors will instantly flash back into your vision. Discovered by Celeste McCullough in 1965, this is one of the most unique and dangerous illusions in cognitive science because it doesn't happen in the retina. It happens inside the structural architecture of your visual cortex. It is a contingent after effect. Your brain's primary visual cortex possesses edge-sensitive neurons that are fine-tuned to process color and orientation simultaneously. By staring at the colorful grids for so long, you actively trigger a process similar to classical conditioning inside your brain cells, rewiring their resting baseline. The neurons become structurally adapted to link horizontal edges with the color green and vertical edges with pink. It is a sobering, powerful reminder of how easily our minds can be deeply conditioned by intense, repetitive environmental patterns, burning habits and illusions into our circuitry that can take months of conscious effort to untangle. Imagine walking up to a lottery ticket booth. If the machine automatically prints a random number combination for you, you will feel a standard, low level of confidence about winning. But if the booth allows you to pick your own numbers manually, you will feel a sudden surge of internal confidence. You will be willing to pay up to 4 times more money for that ticket because you feel you have a better chance of winning. Mathematically, the odds are perfectly identical down to the decimal point. You are a victim of the illusion of control, the comforting delusion that your actions can dictate random universe events. Coined by Ellen Langer in 1975, the illusion of control reveals a profound human psychological defense mechanism against the terrifying randomness of existence. Our brains hate the concept of helplessness. When we engage in familiar, choice-driven behaviors like picking numbers, pressing a walk button at a crosswalk that isn't connected to anything, or blowing on dice before a throw, our brain rewards us with a powerful feeling of efficacy and safety. We confuse our internal desires and actions with external physical probabilities. While this illusion keeps us sane and prevents us from sinking into depression, it also drives gambling addictions and superstitious behaviors. It teaches us that our need for control is often a beautiful, tragic fiction we tell ourselves to brave a universe that doesn't care about our choices. Imagine standing inside a massive, beautifully engineered architectural dome, like Grand Central Terminal's Whispering Gallery or a grand cathedral. You stand in the far left corner, facing a cold stone wall, miles away from your friend who is standing in the opposite far right corner, facing away from you. If your friend whispers a soft, fragile secret at a volume lower than a rustling leaf, you will hear their voice materialize directly inside your own ear, crystal clear and raw, as if they are standing right behind your shoulder, breathing against your skin. This acoustical illusion is a masterpiece of architectural geometry. In a standard room, sound waves reflect off flat surfaces in every direction, scattering randomly and losing their energy quickly across space. But inside a perfect elliptical dome or a whispering gallery, the curved masonry acts as a high-precision sound guide. The acoustic waves traveling from one focus point of the ellipse are forced to hug the curved ceiling, sliding smoothly along the walls without scattering, before perfectly converging back together at the exact opposite focus point. When those concentrated waves hit your ear, your auditory cortex is completely fooled. Because the sound waves are so intense and undamaged, your brain calculates that the speaker must be standing right next to you. It is a beautiful sensory experience that bridges massive physical distance, showing that when the architecture around us is shaped with intention, a whispered truth can travel through miles of empty space to hit us right in the heart. Imagine walking into a luxury grocery store looking for a jar of jam. The store manager has set up a massive display table featuring 24 exotic, unique flavors from around the world. You feel a sudden rush of excitement. You love choice, but as you stand there, overwhelmed by the endless options, your brain locks up. You become anxious, exhausted, and end up walking out of the store without buying a single jar. The next week, the store displays only 6 flavors, and you instantly buy a jar with a smile. This is the illusion of choice. Extensively researched by Sheena Iyengar in her famous jam study, this cognitive illusion exposes a profound conflict in modern human psychology. We are culturally conditioned to believe that more choice equals more freedom, more happiness, and better decisions. But biologically, our brains are ancient machines built to conserve metabolic energy. When presented with an excessive explosion of options, our cognitive load spikes, triggering a state of mental paralysis known as choice overload. We become terrified of making the wrong choice and experiencing regret, so our brain simply aborts the mission entirely. It teaches us an incredibly deep lifestyle lesson. Our obsession with chasing endless possibilities in our careers, relationships, and consumer choices doesn't make us free. It locks us in a prison of permanent dissatisfaction, proving that true peace is found when we learn to prune the branches of option and commit to the choice in front of us. We have reached the grand finale of our long journey through 50 Secrets of the Mind. Look down at your hands once more and press them firmly against the solid wooden desk or stone table in front of you. Feels unyielding, dense, and real. But let us close our journey by shattering your reality one last time using the ultimate truth of quantum physics. The solid table you are touching is actually /BM 99.9999999% completely empty space. It is a ghost town of vacuum, and the feeling of solidity is nothing more than an electromagnetic illusion. An atom is constructed of a central nucleus surrounded by a cloud of electrons. To visualize the scale, if the nucleus of an atom were the size of a single marble sitting on the midfield line of a massive football stadium, the outer electrons would be tiny specks of dust spinning around the very top row of the stadium seats. Everything in between those 2 points is absolute, terrifying, empty nothingness. When you press your hand against the table, the atoms of your hand never physically touch the atoms of the wood. Instead, the negative electron clouds of your hand get close enough to the negative electron clouds of the table to trigger an intense, subatomic electromagnetic repulsion. The feeling of solidity is nothing more than your brain interpreting this invisible, energetic force field fighting your hand. The entire physical world we live in is a ghostly projection of energy fields pretending to be solid matter. It is a beautiful, awe-inspiring conclusion to the human story. We are beings made of stardust and light waves, walking through a world built on invisible forces, creating a solid reality out of the void simply by being here to perceive it. Imagine staring at a wall covered in a pattern of blurred, fuzzy black and white striped discs called Gabor patches. The discs are completely static. But if you take a few steps back and look at the wall as a whole, the discs in your peripheral vision will begin to slide, jitter, and float around like microscopic cells under a microscope. Try to look directly at a floating disc to catch it moving, and it instantly freezes mid-track. Your brain is actively hallucinating movement in the corners of your eyes because it cannot process the blurry borders. Gabor patches are highly specific visual stimuli used by neuroscientists to map the receptive fields of cells in the primary visual cortex. They represent the exact type of visual data that your brain's V1 neurons are fine-tuned to detect luminance gradients and spatial frequencies. When these fuzzy, blurred lines are placed in your peripheral vision, where your visual acuity drops significantly, your brain's orientation-selective neurons experience a high degree of signal noise. The brain struggles to determine the exact spatial location of the blurred edges. To resolve this computational uncertainty, the motion detection circuits interpret the noisy, fluctuating neural signals as physical, kinetic movement. It reveals that our peripheral vision is an unstable, predictive simulation, constantly guessing what is happening in the shadows of our awareness. Imagine walking through a high-security airport terminal. You have committed no crimes, you have no illegal contraband in your bags, and you are a perfectly law-abiding citizen. Yet, as you walk past a line of armed police officers and customs agents staring intently at the crowd, your heart rate suddenly spikes, your palms sweat, and an intense wave of internal guilt washes over your body. You feel like a caught criminal, completely convinced that your body language is screaming guilty to the world. This psychological distortion is a variant of the spotlight effect combined with deep-seated social conditioning. From childhood, we are taught to fear authority and consequences. When placed in a high-scrutiny environment, your brain triggers a primitive fight-or-flight response, treating the authority figures as active predators. Because your internal emotional state is so intense, your introspection engine misinterprets your physical anxiety as a sign of actual moral guilt. You confuse the fear of being accused with the reality of being guilty. This illusion can cause innocent people to confess to crimes they never committed during intense, high-pressure police interrogations, proving that our emotional nervous systems can easily rewrite our internal sense of innocence under the heavy shadow of scrutiny. Draw a simple, flat, black and white line drawing of a beautiful country landscape, just plain black ink on white paper. Now, take a bright neon blue marker and draw a series of thin, horizontal grid lines directly across the sky section of the drawing. If you step back and look at the image, a stunning visual mutation occurs. The empty white spaces between the blue lines will suddenly glow with a beautiful, rich, saturated blue hue, transforming the plain paper into a vibrant summer sky. The color is bleeding across the void. Known as the neon color spreading illusion, this phenomenon reveals how our visual cortex calculates boundaries and surface fills. When your brain encounters sharp, colorful lines that abruptly intersect with black lines, its form processing modules assume that the color must belong to a single, continuous semi-transparent object floating on top of the background. Instead of processing the lines as isolated threads, the visual cortex activates its surface-filling neurons, actively spreading the color signal across the empty white spaces inside your mind to create a cohesive visual layer. It is a brilliant display of cognitive optimization, proving that our minds would rather invent a beautifully filled universe than leave us staring at a fragmented, broken grid of isolated data. You are sitting in a perfectly clean, modern office building when suddenly you catch a powerful, distinct whiff of burning toast, wet dog, or a specific perfume worn by your childhood grandmother. You look around, but there is no toaster, no animal, and no one else in the room. You ask your coworker if they can smell it, and they look at you with total confusion. You are experiencing phantasmia, olfactory hallucination where your brain constructs a complex chemical scent completely out of the architecture of your memories. Phantasmia can be triggered by minor neurological anomalies, sinus infections, or emotional stress, but its psychological engine is deeply tied to the structure of our brain layout. The olfactory bulb, which processes smell, has direct, high-speed neural connections to the amygdala and the hippocampus, the ancient centers of emotion and memory. This is why smells trigger far more intense, nostalgic emotional flashbacks than sights or sounds. When a stray neural spark or a spike of stress fires inside these memory centers, it can travel backward along the neural highway, forcing the olfactory cortex to render a full three-dimensional scent experience out of pure thin air. It shows that our brains carry a permanent, invisible library of our entire sensory past, waiting for a random emotional trigger to unlock a ghost from our history. Draw a large, massive circle right in the center of a clean white page. Now, fill the surrounding white space with hundreds of tiny, tightly packed black squares, forming a dense grid that wraps around the central circle. If you look at the page, you will notice a bizarre spatial compression. The central circle will appear to physically shrink, tightening its borders as if it is being crushed by the weight of the surrounding grid. Erase the grid, and the circle instantly pops back to its expansive, original size. This spatial illusion is driven by the receptive fields of our retinal ganglion cells, which operate on a center-surround antagonism mechanism. When an object is surrounded by a highly dense, high-frequency pattern like a tight grid, the surrounding receptors fire intensely, sending a massive wave of inhibitory signals to the neurons processing the central object. This lateral inhibition actively suppresses the perceived scale of the central object's borders, forcing the brain to compress its physical footprint inside your perception. It serves as a profound psychological metaphor for individuality. When we submerge a unique, singular concept or person inside a hyperdense, rigid, and uniform social grid, their perceived scale and importance are automatically crushed and diminished by the surrounding pressure. Think about the person you were 10 years ago, your taste in music, your fashion choices, your political beliefs, and your core values. You look back at that old version of yourself and laugh, realizing how much you have grown, mutated, and matured. Now, think about the person you are right now and ask yourself how much you will change over the next 10 years. Your brain will confidently tell you that you are pretty much cooked, done, and finished changing. You believe you have finally reached your permanent, final form. You are completely wrong. Coined by psychologist Jordi Koidbach, the illusion of the end of history exposes a fundamental flaw in human temporal foresight. Humans are highly adaptive, evolving creatures who never stop mutating until the day we die. However, our brains suffer from an inherent cognitive laziness. It is incredibly easy and satisfying to remember the past, but it takes an immense amount of metabolic energy and creative imagination to predict a completely different future self. Because we struggle to imagine how our values and tastes will change, our brain takes the easy way out and assumes they won't. This illusion causes us to make permanent decisions, like tattoos, marriages, or career tracks, based on a temporary version of ourselves, proving that we are all walking through life misjudging our own capacity for evolution. Look at a flat, two-dimensional black silhouette of a female dancer spinning on one leg against a white background. As you watch her move, your brain will instantly assign a direction to her spin. She is rotating clockwise. Keep staring at her for 20 seconds, shift your focus to the side, and look back. Suddenly, she will violently snap and begin spinning in the exact opposite direction, counterclockwise. You are watching a flat, unchanging shadow, but your mind is actively shifting her axis of reality back and forth. Created by web designer Nobuyuki Kayahara in 2003, the spinning dancer is a classic bistable silhouette illusion. Because the image is a solid black silhouette, it completely lacks any depth cues or surface contours that tell your eyes whether a leg is passing in front of her body or behind it. The visual data entering your eye can be mathematically interpreted in two perfectly equal three-dimensional ways. Your visual cortex cannot tolerate this structural ambiguity, so it picks one direction as a working hypothesis. Eventually, the neural pathway supporting that first interpretation tires out, forcing the brain to flip to the alternative perspective. It stands as a profound proof that when our data lacks depth, our minds are forced to construct their own arbitrary version of truth, demonstrating that two people can look at the exact same flat fact and see two completely opposite directions of movement. Draw two perfectly straight, parallel horizontal black lines across a page, like a pair of neat horizon wires. Now draw a massive array of straight lines that radiate outward from a single point directly in the center of the page, forming a giant bicycle wheel spoke pattern that passes behind the two parallel lines. If you look at the paper, your eyes will play a shocking trick on you. The two perfectly straight horizontal lines will appear to bend violently outward, bowing away from each other as if they are being warped by a powerful gravitational force field. Discovered by German physiologist Ewald Hering in 1861, this classic illusion exposes how our visual cortex predicts spatial trajectories. The radiating spoke lines mimic the visual pattern you see when you are moving forward through a space. It looks like linear perspective cues stretching toward a distant horizon. Because your brain treats the image as a dynamic 3D space rather than a flat 2D page, it automatically applies an internal angle expansion calculation to compensate for your perceived forward motion. The brain overestimates the acute angles formed where the horizontal lines meet the spokes, forcing the straight lines to warp outward inside your mind. It shows that our brains are fundamentally unsuited for a flat world. We are hardwired to inject depth, movement, and trajectory into every flat surface we encounter. Imagine spending an entire week eating a perfectly clean diet, hitting the gym every morning, and donating a portion of your paycheck to a local charity. You feel a deep, warm sense of moral righteousness. You step into a grocery store on Friday evening, walk past the bakery aisle, and your brain triggers a dangerous thought process. I have been so good this week. I deserve to eat this entire box of donuts. You indulge in a massive binge, completely wiping out your health progress. You have just fallen victim to the illusion of moral licensing. Extensively documented by behavioral economists, moral licensing reveals that the human ego operates on a deeply flawed internal ledger system. When we perform a highly virtuous, altruistic, or disciplined action, our brain registers it as a credit to our moral identity. This internal credit triggers a subconscious feeling of psychological entitlement, which relaxes our self-control mechanisms. We feel we have earned the right to be a little bad, allowing us to indulge in unethical, unhealthy, or lazy behaviors without experiencing a drop in self-esteem. It reveals that our pursuit of virtue can often become the very engine that drives our vice, showing that our minds are highly skilled at using our past goodness to justify our immediate failures. Look at a graphic image that appears to show a series of black, white, and gray overlapping rope strands twisting inward to form a massive, continuous spiral that dives down into an infinite vortex in the center of the screen. Trace the spiral inward with your index finger, expecting to travel deep into the center. Within a single loop, your finger will hit a dead end, wrapping around to meet itself. There is no spiral. The image is actually made of perfectly separate, concentric, nested circles. Your brain has twisted a flat grid into a continuous spiral path. First described by British psychologist James Fraser in 1908, this illusion is known as a false spiral. It works because the individual strands that form the circles are covered in a highly specific, tilted alignment pattern of alternating black and white pixels. When your visual cortex tracks these tiny, localized directional tilts, its orientation-selective cells get overwhelmed. The brain attempts to connect these jagged, mismatched fragments into a smooth visual path. Because the pixels slant inward, the brain combines the directional data across space, overriding the global structure of the concentric circles and forcing your conscious awareness to see a continuous, diving spiral. It shows that when the micro-details of our lives are tilted in a specific direction, our minds will completely distort the macrostructure of our reality, turning isolated cycles into a spinning vortex. Sit in a dark room with your eyes closed and listen to a sound recording of a car engine or a siren that is steadily increasing in volume at a perfectly linear mathematical rate. If you ask your brain what is happening, your internal threat detection circuits will panic, insisting that the object is accelerating toward your body at a terrifying, compounding speed, closing the distance much faster than it actually is. Stop the audio and your heart rate will drop. Your mind is artificially amplifying the acceleration of sound to save your life. The auditory looming illusion is an evolutionary survival adaptation deeply embedded within our auditory cortex. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, a sound getting louder meant a predator was actively hunting you down through the brush. Because missing an approaching threat carried a fatal survival cost, evolution fine-tuned our acoustic processing centers to be hypersensitive to rising intensities. The brain applies an asymmetrical distortion to looming sounds, processing an increase in volume as an exponential surge in proximity rather than a linear acoustic shift. Conversely, when a sound decreases in volume, receding away from you, the brain applies no such distortion. It proves that our senses are not designed to give us an objective, scientific reading of physical data. They are designed to keep us alive by transforming potential threats into dramatic sensory warnings. Take a completely random coin and flip it 100 times in a row, recording the results on a page. As you track the sequence, you will inevitably hit a patch where the coin lands on heads. 6 times in a row, HHHHHH. If you show this sequence to a human being, they will instantly jump to a conclusion. The coin is rigged or you have a special trick technique. Their mind completely refuses to accept that a streak of absolute uniformity can be born out of pure, unadulterated randomness. Known as the clustering illusion, this cognitive error is the driving psychological engine behind gambling addictions and historical superstitions. The human brain is a highly advanced pattern recognition machine that evolved to spot regularities in nature, like migration routes or weather shifts. However, our minds have a terrible intuitive understanding of probability. We expect random distributions to look perfectly even and alternating like a checkerboard. In reality, true mathematical randomness is messy, clumped, and filled with long streaks of coincidence. When our brain encounters these natural clusters, it automatically overrides the laws of probability, inventing secret narratives, luck, or conspiracies to explain away the chaos. It shows how deeply uncomfortable we are with a world driven by pure chance, forcing us to invent patterns to keep our reality feeling orderly. Cut 2 identical, curved toy track pieces out of a piece of plastic or cardboard, forming 2 identical crescent toy arches. Place them on a table, stacked neatly one directly on top of the other. If you look at them, you will gasp. The bottom arch will look significantly longer, wider, and larger than the top arch, appearing to dwarf its partner completely. Shift the bottom arch up to the top position, and their sizes instantly invert in your mind. Your eyes refuse to see they are identical twins. Discovered by American psychologist Joseph Jastrow in 1889, this geometric illusion exploits how our brain processes contrast along curved boundaries. When you stack the 2 crescent arches, the short inner radius curve of the top arch sits directly next to the long outer radius curve of the bottom arch. Your visual cortex does not measure the total volume of the 2 shapes independently. Instead, it focuses heavily on the high-contrast borderline where the 2 objects meet. The dramatic contrast between the short edge and the long edge forces the brain to exaggerate the size difference, making the bottom shape look massively inflated. It serves as a beautiful proof of our comparative nature, showing that our judgment of an object's scale or a person's status can be completely distorted simply by aligning their shortest attributes against another's longest. Stand in front of a specialized psychological mirror apparatus that splits your vision. Your left eye looks at your own face in a real mirror, While your right eye looks through a piece of polarized glass at the face of a complete stranger sitting on the other side of the wall. When the researcher dims the lights and balances the illumination between both sides, something terrifying happens to your consciousness. The two faces will physically fuse together inside your mind. You will look into the mirror and see your own eyes staring out from a stranger's skull, creating a grotesque, identity-shattering hybrid creature. This striking phenomenon is a variant of binocular rivalry combined with our brain's hyperspecialized facial processing modules. When your two eyes are presented with two completely different structural images, your face versus a stranger's face, your visual cortex enters a state of deep instability. Instead of showing you a messy, double-exposed blur, the brain attempts to resolve the sensory conflict by stitching the high-priority features of both faces together into a single, cohesive human entity. Because the fusiform face area is hardwired to prioritize human geometry above all else, it forces your sense of identity to expand, adopting the stranger's features into your own body map. It is a haunting, beautiful display of empathy wired into our hardware, showing that at a cellular level, the boundary separating our own face from the face of a stranger is incredibly fluid and easily blurred. Draw a large, wide parallelogram on a page, slanting sharply to the right. Now, divide the shape into two unequal interior triangles by drawing a series of diagonal lines. Inside the left triangle, draw a long diagonal line stretching from the bottom corner to the top edge. Inside the right triangle, draw an identical diagonal line. If you look at the drawing, your brain will lie to you with absolute certainty, insisting that the left diagonal line is nearly twice as long as the right diagonal line. Measure them with a ruler, and you will find they are identical down to the millimeter. First published by German psychologist Friedrich Sander in 1926, this illusion exposes how our visual system integrates surrounding space into its structural linear calculations. The left diagonal line is completely enclosed within a massive, expansive triangle, while the right diagonal line is hemmed in by a tight, compressed triangular space. Your visual cortex does not process the lines as isolated vectors. It assimilates the volume of the surrounding geometry into its length estimations. The brain scales up the perceived length of the left line to match the expansive scale of its container shape. It acts as an incredible psychological lesson. The scale of our personal journeys and struggles is entirely dictated by the size of the container we are placed in, forcing us to look longer or shorter based entirely on the geometry of our surroundings. Imagine a novice guitar player who has only been practicing for 3 weeks, a freshman political student who has read a single book, or an amateur investor who made a lucky trade. If you ask them how much they know about their field, they will look you in the eye and confidently declare that they are near experts, possessing an unshakable sense of absolute certainty. Now, ask a 10-year veteran professor or a master craftsman the same question, and they will sigh, hesitate, and list 1,000 things they still don't understand. Discovered by Justin Kruger and David Dunning in 1999, the Dunning-Kruger effect reveals a profound paradox in human metacognition. To accurately judge your own lack of skill in a domain, you need to possess a baseline level of expertise in that domain to understand what excellence actually looks like. Because beginners lack this competence, they are completely blind to their own ignorance. They suffer from an illusion of absolute mastery. As a person gains real knowledge, they climb the mountain of humility, finally realizing how vast the field is and how little they actually grasp. It teaches us a humbling truth about human discourse. The loudest, most confident voices in a room are often the ones who understand the least, while true wisdom is marked by a quiet, comfortable relationship with uncertainty. Walk into a dimly lit room covered in dull, muddy wallpaper. Take a dark piece of cardboard and punch a microscopic, tiny pinhole right through the center of it with a needle. Hold the cardboard right up to your dominant eye and stare through the pinhole at the dull wallpaper. As your eye adjusts, something magical happens. the tiny patch of wallpaper visible through the hole will suddenly look incredibly bright, vivid, and saturated with sharp, intense colors, as if someone shined a high-powered spotlight onto that single spot. This visual transformation occurs because a pinhole functions as a natural optical filter that eliminates spherical aberration. In a normal environment, light rays bounce off objects in every direction, entering your wide pupil at various chaotic angles, causing a minor degree of optical scattering and blur on your retina. When you force the light to pass through a tiny pinhole, you block out all the scattered, off-axis light rays, allowing only a tight, coherent beam of parallel photons to strike your center of vision, fovea. This massive reduction in visual noise allows your cone photoreceptors to fire with absolute clarity and efficiency, boosting the perceived contrast and color saturation inside your mind. It shows that when we eliminate the chaotic distractions of our environment and focus our awareness through a narrow, disciplined lens, the dull realities around us can transform into vibrant, intense experiences. Imagine stepping into a DMV office to renew your driver's license. The form has a small checkbox that reads, "Check here if you want to become an organ donor. In this country, only \BM 20% of people sign up." Now, cross the border into a neighboring nation with a completely identical culture, where the form reads, "Check here if you do not want to become an organ donor. In this country, an insane \BM 99% of people are donors." The citizens didn't make a deep moral choice. Their life-saving altruism was completely manufactured by a single word on a page. Researched extensively by behavioral economists like Richard Thaler, the illusion of choice architecture reveals that human beings are profoundly vulnerable to status quo bias and default options. Making an active, conscious decision requires mental effort, cognitive analysis, and a confrontation with existential anxiety. When a system presents us with a pre-selected default option, our lazy brains interpret it as the recommended, safe, and socially approved path of least resistance. We accept the default without ever questioning it, fully convinced we made a free choice. It is a sobering reminder of how deeply our lives are steered by the invisible designers who build the choices around us, showing that our free will can be easily hacked simply by changing the starting line of a question. Draw a series of thick, bold black vertical columns across a white page. Now, take a light gray marker and draw two identical, uniform gray rectangles. Place the first gray rectangle directly inside the white columns, and place the second gray rectangle directly inside the black columns. If you look at the page, your eyes will confidently lie to you. The rectangle sitting inside the white columns will look incredibly dark and moody, while the rectangle sitting inside the black columns will look pale, bright, and silver. Your brain has completely rewritten the lightness value of an identical gray ink. Discovered by Michael White in 1979, this illusion completely overturned old, simplistic theories of lateral retinal inhibition. Classic contrast physics states that a dark background should make an object look lighter, and a light background should make it look darker. But in White's effect, the gray rectangles defy this rule, assimilating the color values of the columns they are embedded within. This proves that color calculations do not happen solely in the low-level cells of your retina. They are processed higher up in the visual cortex's V2 and V4 areas, where the brain performs complex grouping algorithms. The brain groups the rectangle with its master column before calculating its final appearance, proving that our perception of truth is completely dictated by the structural groups we are assigned to. Think about a major, dramatic turning point in your life from 5 years ago. A bad breakup, a career failure, or a sudden loss. When you remember that event today, you look at it as a perfect, cinematic story arc. I had to go through that darkness to find my true strength and become the hero I am today. Feels neat, intentional, and real. But psychological tracking proves that this clean story arc is a total fabrication. Your brain has systematically deleted your real, chaotic, and messy history to turn your life into a Hollywood movie script. This cognitive illusion is known as narrative smoothing or retrospective rationalization. In reality, when you were going through that past crisis, your mind was a chaotic, meaningless mess of random anxiety, doubt, and uncoordinated thoughts. There was no clean arc. It was pure survival chaos. However, the human ego cannot tolerate a life driven by meaningless, random trauma. To protect your sanity and maintain your self-esteem, your brain acts like a high-powered script editor. It selectively deletes memories of your worst breakdowns, amplifies minor moments of courage, and connects unrelated events with a fake line of destiny. It shows that we are all unreliable authors of our own autobiographies, constantly rewriting our histories to transform our random, chaotic survival struggles into a beautiful, meaningful journey of purpose. Imagine watching a beautiful, vivid rainbow during a violent summer thunderstorm. Suddenly, a massive, turbulent gust of wind rips through the area. As the wind hits the storm front, the rainbow in the sky does something completely terrifying. It appears to tear apart. The red band stays put, but the blue and violet bands are violently yanked to the side, smearing the sky into a jagged, chaotic glitch. This is a split-spectrum rainbow, a direct visual recording of atmospheric violence. We tend to think of raindrops as uniform spheres falling straight down, but a turbulent storm introduces chaotic aerodynamics. When a powerful, localized wind shear or microburst hits a patch of rain, it forces the larger droplets to deform aggressively, while the tiny droplets maintain their shape. Even crazier, the wind can physically sort the raindrops by size, blowing the lighter, smaller drops further downwind while the heavy, massive drops plunge straight down. Because smaller drops refract light at fractionally smaller angles than large drops, this aerodynamic sorting forces the different color bands to decouple. The red light, coming from the heavy drops, and the violet light, coming from the small, wind-blown drops, no longer share the same geometric origin. The rainbow literally splits at the seams, proving that the wind has the power to physically manipulate the geometry of color. If you look out into a pitch-black midnight rainstorm with your naked human eyes, you will see absolutely nothing but darkness and wet asphalt. But if you hold up a modern high-definition night vision camera or an ultra-sensitive astrophotography sensor, the digital screen will reveal a shocking secret. The midnight sky is actively blazing with a towering, hyper-vivid, multicolored rainbow. It is hiding in the dark, waiting for a machine to pull it into reality. This is a high-tech revelation of the classic moonbow. As we established earlier, our human eyes are biologically limited. Our low-light rod cells cannot process color, making nighttime rainbows look like ghostly white arches. But modern digital sensors do not possess human biological limitations. They utilize high quantum efficiency CMOS sensors that can count individual photons of light. When a night camera takes a rapid succession of exposures or uses real-time AI noise reduction algorithms, it accumulates the faint, lunar reflected photons bouncing off the midnight rain. The camera doesn't invent the color. It simply reveals the objective physical truth that the red, green, and blue wavelengths are actively bouncing through the dark. It stands as a beautiful metaphor for modern technology. It expands the boundaries of our biology, allowing us to see that the universe is painting masterpieces even when we are trapped in total darkness. Next time you stand in front of a bright rainbow, don't just look up at the sky. Look down at the long, dramatic shadow your body casts on the grass or the road ahead of you. If you look closely at the edges of your shadow, especially around your head, you will notice something incredibly eerie. Your shadow isn't a solid, crisp black outline. The edges appear to bleed, stretch, and glow with a faint, warm orange and red fringe, as if your own shadow is trying to turn into a rainbow. This is an optical phenomenon called penumbral chromatic fringing, and it happens because the sun is not a single, sharp point of light in space. It is a massive, wide disk. When sunlight travels over your shoulders to form your shadow, the light rays coming from the left edge of the sun and the right edge of the sun cross over your body at slightly different angles. When these edge rays hit the falling raindrops ahead of you, they undergo the exact same /BM, 42 carat /circ, refraction that creates the main rainbow. This means the light bleeding into the edges of your shadow is actively being split into its component colors. Your shadow becomes a direct participant in the optical architecture of the sky, proving that you cannot separate your physical presence from the beautiful, bending dance of the light around you. Imagine driving through a valley during a clearing storm. You look up and see a primary rainbow, but instead of the colors fading evenly into the background, the green and yellow bands look intensely squished and compressed, while the red band looks completely bloated, taking up half the sky. It looks like a poorly printed comic book where the colors don't line up. This is a sandwich rainbow, caused when the atmosphere forms a literal lens inside a lens. This rare distortion is caused by a severe thermal inversion in the atmosphere. Normally, air gets colder as you go higher, but during a thermal inversion, a layer of warm air gets trapped directly on top of a layer of freezing cold air. Because warm air and cold air have different densities, they possess completely different refractive indices. The boundary line between the warm and cold air acts like a massive, flat, atmospheric lens stretching for miles. When the light exiting the raindrops passes through this thermal boundary on its way to your eyes, it gets bent a second time. This secondary bending warps the standard /BM, 42 carat /circ, geometric cone, flattening certain color bands while elongating others. It is a stunning visual diagnostic tool that allows meteorologists to look at a rainbow and instantly read the invisible, temperature-layered vertical structure of the sky. When a billionaire buys a flawless, multi-million-dollar diamond, or when a lover looks down at an engagement ring, they marvel at the stone's fire. The way it flashes with blinding sparks of intense red, blue, and green light under the jewelry store lamps. This isn't a special property of the diamond's chemistry. It is a highly compressed, ultra-powerful rainbow system trapped inside a crystal cage, operating on a scale of absolute mathematical perfection. A diamond is one of the most optically dense materials on Earth. It has a staggeringly high refractive index of 2.42, compared to water's 1.33. This means that when white light enters a diamond, it is slowed down to less than half its cosmic speed. This extreme deceleration forces the light waves to bend violently. Jewelers exploit this by cutting the diamond with highly precise geometric angles, known as facets. The facets act as a high-performance array of entry prisms and internal mirrors. The white light enters, reflects off the internal walls of the diamond multiple times, and disperses into its component wavelengths with incredible, clean separation before exiting. The sparkle of a diamond is literally a collection of microscopic, hypercompressed rainbows shooting out of the stone, showing that the exact same laws that paint a 5-mile arc across the sky can be trapped inside a rock on your finger. A little deeper into comfort. The day is behind you now, and there is nowhere you need to be but here, resting. And if you're still awake, there will be another video on screen for you to continue the journey a little longer. If these calm explorations help you unwind, you might also like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. It helps other sleepy souls find their way here, too. For now, let your thoughts settle and let the night carry you the rest of the way. Sleep well and good night.